As a contractor, I don't pay for materials I don't use. So why would I pay for stuff I don't need in my mobile plan? That's why my Biz plan from Verizon Business is so perfect. Now I can choose exactly what I want, and I only pay for what I need.
Right now, with my Biz plan, get our best price, as low as $25 a line. Visit Verizon.com/business to get started today. New lines only. Price per month with 5+ lines. Includes auto pay and paper-free billing and promotional discounts. Taxes, fees, economic adjustment charge. Applicable add-ons, prices, and terms apply. Guarantee applies to base monthly rate and stated discounts only. Add-on prices additional. Offers in March 31st, 2026.
Today, President Trump spoke to the nation with some good news about the war.
They did something yesterday that was amazing, actually. They gave us a present, and the present arrived today. It was a very big present worth a tremendous amount of money. And I'm not going to tell you what that present is, but it was a very significant prize.
Wait, you got a gift from the people you are currently at war with. When I was at school, I couldn't believe the Trojans fell for that Trojan horse. The Secret Service is going to be like, Mr. President, please don't bring that to the Situation Room. But it's expensive. And it's ticking. I bet it's a watch.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that is more deviant than devious. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith. We're here to calm the nerves, lighten the load, and turn that frown upside down.
All while helping you regain a sense of agency over the decisions that affect you.
So take a breath, count to 10, and join us as we begin another Quiet Riot.
Quiet Riot. Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi.
And I'm the regular third mic and permanent producer Kenny, trying my level best to keep these two to point, and more importantly, to time.
Now, before we get going, as all of our listeners know, we offer our content to everyone free at the same time. But we love to show our appreciation to those of you who help make that a reality by supporting us on a regular basis. We offer regular online events, and the next one is imminent. It is this weekend on Sunday at 5 p.m. If you would like a chance to ask any of us anything at all that you want, political or not, go to ko-fi.com/quietriotpod and support us for as little as $5 a month. By Friday afternoon, if you've done it, you'll get your invitation.
Now, what shall we talk about today? With the energy crisis, the word on everyone's lips again is inflation. Should we be panic buying loo like we did during COVID? So this week, we'll be looking at the impact on our wallets from the ongoing insanity of Trump's war on Iran and what levers, if any, the UK government has to pull to help us out.
And there's a new study of deviance out. That's going to appeal to all our listeners, isn't it? Roughly 1 in 3 Brits has got a criminal record, it transpires, but fewer than 1 in 50 of us belongs to a political party. So, statistically speaking, a convicted criminal is about 15 times more normal. We're going to dig into who these party members are and why they matter more than you might think.
Well, that's more than enough for this rogues gallery to get through. Let's crack on.
Quiet Riot.
The consequences of Donald Trump's military campaign against Iran are now being felt far beyond the Middle East. With the Strait of Hormuz under severe pressure and significant energy infrastructure having been taken out, global oil and gas markets are in turmoil, and British households are bracing for another painful hike in energy bills. Add in the lingering drag of Trump's trade tariffs, and the cost of living outlook in the UK is looking genuinely bleak yet again. Earlier this week, Keir Starmer faced a characteristically pointed session at the influential Liaison Committee in Parliament, where senior MPs pressed him hard on whether the UK is genuinely prepared for the kind of economic and security shocks that are now arriving with uncomfortable regularity, and whether our resilience, military, strategic and economic, are really up to the moment we find ourselves in. Let's have a listen.
President Trump is obviously talking about days and weeks for this conflict to end. The markets are obviously pricing now for a disruption that lasts for some months. I know you've got to be very careful about not triggering panic buying of anything, but I mean, do you think that households and businesses in our country should be planning for a disruption that actually lasts for months, or do you think that actually this can be concluded in days and weeks, as President Trump seems to suggest?
Hard to answer that question, if I'm honest about it. I think all of our focus and energy has to be in the swift de-escalation, but we've got to plan on the basis that it could go on for some time. And that's the way in which we'll plan this afternoon. And since the conflict started, I've been really clear with the team that we mustn't fall in to the sort of false comfort of thinking that there will necessarily be a quick and early end to this. We have to plan on the basis there may not be. On energy supplies, I can reassure the committee that we haven't any meaningful concerns about energy supplies.
Then on Wednesday, Chancellor Rachel Reeves came to the Commons floor to try to get ahead of the energy bill story, promising targeted support for households least able to absorb another surge in their gas and electricity costs. It was as much a political exercise as an economic one, a government trying to demonstrate it does have a grip on a situation that is, in large part, not of its own making.
The last government's failure to invest in energy was a failure to protect our country. But through determined action, this government is taking control of our own energy supply. Investing in renewables, lifting the ban on onshore wind, and streamlining grid connections. Running the biggest offshore wind auction in European history last year and bringing the next renewable auction forward to this July. And driving forward negotiation on the UK's participation in the EU internal electricity market.
The awkward truth is that the tools available to any government in this situation are limited and blunt. When inflation is being driven not by an overheating domestic economy, but by a military conflict thousands of miles away choking off global energy supply, the usual levers just start to look a lot less useful. So, Alex and Kenny, I want to talk about the level of pain we're actually in for, when it might hit hardest, and what the government can realistically do to protect us from the worst of it. Can we start with a kind of basic reality check, Alex? The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most strategically critical energy choke points on the planet. How serious is this damage to energy infrastructure, the closing of the strait to Western ships? And are we talking about a short, sharp shock or something with a much longer tail?
The longer the crisis goes on, the longer the tail of the crisis will be disproportionately, if that makes sense. So, a 5-day crisis, you might recover from it in 3 days. A 10-day crisis might take a month to recover from, and a 3-month crisis may take a year. There are things that resolve themselves pretty instantly, like speculator activity, buying of futures, insurance premiums, for example. If there was a deal done and the Strait of Hormuz reopened straight away, those elements of the cost would resolve themselves straight away, and you would see a little dip in the price to start with. Then there are kind of medium-term things, because there's basically a demand build-up now, and that will take time to reduce. So the demand curve will take a couple of months to flatten, because countries will still be trying to rebuild their reserves used up while this crisis was going on. So demand is not going to go straight back to its previous levels, which means price won't go straight back to its previous levels. Then there's a slightly longer term element. Pumps will take time to reopen and reach efficiency. It doesn't just happen instantly. The International Energy Agency estimates that about 40% of infrastructure in 9 countries around Iran has suffered significant damage. So that will take time to repair. Then you have things like ship congestion, simple things like that. The Gulf is right now full of ships, like waiting to pass safely. There was a very interesting big meeting of sort of CEOs and CFOs of big business, and they reckon Trump has 2 weeks to reopen the strait before commodities markets and their own businesses have to start pricing in a kind of longer horizon where they look at the conflict dragging to June. Taking all of that into account, most analysts I've seen reckon we are looking at 3 to 5 months to restore supply to where it should be from the point of the strait reopening, but only if that happens in the next couple of weeks.
One other element that we should probably add to that list is confidence, because a less confident world is a more expensive place in which to do business. And that expense inevitably feeds through to us as consumers, and how long it takes for key parts of the global economy to feel confident that they know what's happening, not just now and next week, but over the next year and 10 years in the Gulf, is going to have a huge role to play in this. And of course, that question will be, if there's a deal, can we trust Trump to keep to his word anyway? So watch out for that C word.
You're dead right, Kenny, because as ever, we never really know the opportunity cost.
No.
You know, we don't know what decisions are being made around boardrooms the world over to not invest somewhere, to
Exactly.
delay, to not put steel in the ground at a plant in Sunderland or wherever they were considering because of the ongoing impact of high energy prices. And related to that, Kenny, even before the Chancellor spoke to the Commons this week, the government had moved quite quickly to warn energy companies against price gouging in the wake of all the market turbulence we were seeing. How much practical effect does that kind of warning shot actually have?
Mostly you can view it as being politics with a high-vis jacket on. It's look at us, we're doing a thing. Public warnings can deter the most brazen behaviour. It's kind of that idea that padlocks are there to keep honest people honest. So if there's a padlock in a house next door and you're an honest person, you won't break in. The real burglars don't care about the padlocks. They're coming in through the window anyway. Yes, the public warnings will deter the most brazen behaviour, and I dare say it will prepare the ground for investigations. And Reeves is talking about giving the CMA stronger anti-profiteering powers as well. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't sort of magically undo a global supply shock. And if wholesale costs are on the way up, prices are on the way up as well. The real value of the warning is symbolic and it's disciplinary. It tells retailers and suppliers, look, if you guys try anything cute, we are coming for you. And we're coming for you because there's political capital here to be gained as well. So it's useful, transformative, no.
There is a propensity for prices to rise very quickly when there's a shock and fall quite slowly. That's not completely connected to costs and is to do with companies maximizing their profits because they tend to buy quite a long way ahead. So they tend to secure their supply for the next X number of months. So their actual cost is not going up straight away. It's slightly different for gas because the supply is instant. The second element is that I suspect energy companies know that this government would love nothing more than a legitimate excuse to slap a retrospective
windfall tax
on them.
Here we go.
And that, I think, will make them very, very cautious of pissing it off.
Okay, let's stick with levers that can be pulled. Now, the Bank of England, of course, is completely independent of government. But I wanted to ask you both about interest rates being a demand side tool applied to what is very much a supply side problem and kind of like the mismatch between that. How useful is that blunt tool when actually the inflation is coming from the supply side, the military conflict, energy shock, rather than because we've got this overheating market and people are spending too freely? It's kind of almost designed for a different kind of problem, isn't it?
It's pretty useless for what you might call the first round problem because bank rate changes can't reopen Hormuz. Bank rate changes won't repair blown up pipelines. They won't unblow up a gas terminal because, as you said, Naomi, it's a supply shock. It's not a consumer boom hangover. But what rates can do is help, and I put that in inverted commas, stop a shock spreading into wages, into expectations and broader price
Like
setting
secondary
behavior.
inflationary pressure.
Exactly that,
Right.
which is why the banks held rates at 3.75%. And, it's sounding hawkish again. So it's not that the bank is useless here, but what it has to do, because these are the only tools at its disposal, is treat the fever, not the infection, if that makes sense.
Right, so it's like a tool that's working through punishment. Like if you make borrowing so expensive that demand falls enough to squeeze inflation out of the rest of the system, even if that inflation wasn't really caused by excess demand in the first place, to me that just feels like treating a broken leg with like going on a diet. Like it's good to go on a diet, but it's not going to help fix your broken leg.
And we talked about this at the time of the first Ukraine shock, that it was a useless tool to apply in that situation. And in fact, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has done a big study around those 2022 price fluctuations and they looked at a number of central banks that were quite hawkish and a number of central banks that did not try to increase interest rates to combat this, and they found there was zero difference, actually. The prices went up and they went down, responding to what was happening in that external situation that had caused them in the first place. However, look at a situation like COVID, and it did make a difference because in that situation, yes, the shock was external, but the government was putting people on furlough. So people were sitting at home with quite a bit of extra cash sloshing around. It's very similar to what Kenny's saying, but I wouldn't look at it as first stage and second stage. I would say that there is a level of interest rates that seeks to encourage spending and a level of interest rates that basically tries to keep spending where it is. And if there is an external shock, you don't want to add to the heat in the economy by also encouraging spending. So the balance they have to hit is just slightly higher than it would be if they were simply trying to encourage the economy to grow without this external shock going on.
So what could the government be doing? I mean, when we look at Ireland, they are cutting fuel duty, trying to do something that is more linked to the cause of the inflation. Consumer taxes, is that a better way to try and deal with the impending inflationary pressure that none of us, but least of all those who are at the bottom end of the earning scale, can absorb?
There is the always present risk that you make things worse by meddling this way. Away from the craziness of wars, in the real world, higher rates mean bad news in the mortgage front. They mean bad news if you're a business trying to borrow to invest.
But it's bad news for the government as well, that has, just announced all of its Pride in Place projects. It's going to be, trying to reach that housing target, everything it wants to do to make itself popular, to get the country happier and healthier and wealthier, has now just all got so much more expensive for the delivery of those projects.
Life comes at you fast when you're in government and Trump is on the other side of the pond. I suppose the bank's counter-argument would be that doing nothing would risk a sort of an inflation psychology taking hold. UK inflation expectations have already gone up this month quite sharply. That's the sort of thing that central bankers lose sleep over.
The additional element is how badly this affects fertilizer prices, because that means a lag and food inflation coming down the line.
Great.
It's bad news for everyone, but is it particularly bad news for a government that is actually very unpopular and gets no credit for any of the good things it's doing? Does it actually give it a cover for not managing to get stuff done like its housing target or whatever? Are we going to be hearing in 2 years' time that it was all down to these wars derailing the program they had? And also, does it provide an opportunity for something else to become the top issue in everyone's mind, and for the government to be seen to be proactive and dealing with that crisis that's not of its making quite well? It can be either thing, can't it?
I mean, it's quite dangerous to talk about these interest rate changes in isolation, because at the same time as we're talking about those tools that central banks have, companies and businesses are making real world decisions which are based on uncertainty, based on rising prices, based on the fear that borrowing costs are going to go up, based on uncertainty. To give you just two examples, I mean, this week, Volkswagen announced that it's going to focus more on building missiles rather than cars, because, hey, there's a huge market for it and there's a huge demand for it. And at the same time, in the US in particular, we're seeing farmers moving away from growing things like wheat, which require fertilizer. Alex, you highlighted that already. Nitrogen costs going through the roof. So farmers are going to do things like grow soy or other legumes, because the profit margin...
That's all I eat.
It's all you eat. Well, you're in for happy times, because bean prices are going to plummet.
Quiet, Riot. You didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win
with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
Quiet, Riot.
Rachel Reeves is promising support for the most vulnerable households when it comes to paying for their heating, their gas, their electricity. But all we ever hear about is the fiscal constraint the government has set itself. So where are we currently at with headroom? How much does she genuinely have to play with? And will targeted support be enough when the squeeze is going to hit so far up the income scale?
Depends on how they structure it. Again, looking back at the example of what happened in 2022, in France, for instance, the French government put a cap on energy prices and helped out energy companies with some tax relief and things like that. That means that the higher price was never absorbed into inflation. So it had an anti-inflationary effect.
Yeah.
Over here, what Johnson did was give a subsidy to people so that they could afford to pay the much higher prices, which had an inflationary effect because the prices actually were allowed to rise. So will the government look at that lesson and take it and intervene to keep prices low? That seems to me to be really key. What businesses will be looking for is a government that is prepared to take its lead from them in a way, to go to them and say, what can I do to make life easier for you, rather than apply quite blunt wholesale solutions to try and solve the situation. We shouldn't be in it. We are in it because there's a mad syphilitic king across the ocean.
Our own one's going to see him soon.
And, well, okay. Charles is not syphilitic. He's just a king. I just need to make that distinction for listeners.
In which Naomi gets all three of us separated from our heads.
I know. She's still doing bloody Sunday school from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, isn't it? Her mind is just full of filth. But like I said, there's this thing happening and everyone is having to deal with it. And churn like this can generate opportunities for meaningful change. If you don't panic and lose your head, churn like this is an ideal time to be saying, let's look at how this is working. Let's look at the energy market. Let's look at the infrastructure, what our mix is, whether we should be encouraging people off gas altogether.
And have nice little mini modular reactors in our back garden.
There's another element to this as well. May elections coming up, and politics is going to play a huge part in this. Now, Alex, you've highlighted how there are different ways of coming at this problem. The French example is a cracking example. That contrast is really solid. But if Rachel Reeves is looking at targeted help, well, targeting will, if it's done properly, help the worst off. That's not going to solve the fact that there's a whole pile of people in middle-income Britain who are only one nasty bill shock away from becoming very, very angry indeed. If you then blend that in with whatever happens in the wake of the May local elections and the elections in Wales and Scotland, you might have quite a political tinderbox there.
And we know that universal benefits do have the benefit of everybody championing them. When you go down a means testing route, give certain amounts to certain people and not to others, you can have the others turn on the group that are recipient quite quickly.
Universal benefits are also inflationary, and we're in an environment, of course, where we don't want to add any more heat to this economy. They really don't want to do that. Otherwise, it hurts everybody, especially the poorest people.
Which I think points to how people's attitudes have fundamentally changed after COVID. There is now an expectation that if these things happen, the government will do something to help.
That's right.
That simply wasn't there before. If you look at previous oil crises, loads of businesses failed. Loads of people ended up shuttering their shops, and Thatcher would just shrug her shoulders and say, that's capitalism. The stronger businesses will survive. That expectation has changed fundamentally, but without the related expectation about what we pay in tax changing. So everyone complains that they're paying too much tax, even though the UK is perfectly middling to low if you look at comparative countries, and also expects the government to step in anytime something external increases their bills or affects their business. That's a really nasty pincer movement to be in.
we've been very domestic so far. This is a global conflict with ramifications far beyond our shores. And Alex, look, it's natural that we will be more concerned about how it's affecting us here in the UK and Europe, but presumably other countries are much more exposed to all of this than we are.
The economists did a really good piece of work. They identified two basic factors: how exposed you are to the energy shock, so how much oil do you use, how much of it comes from the Strait of Hormuz, what are your other options and choices and things like that. And they also did a sort of resilience score, which country has strong buffers against that sort of thing because it has reserves, or because it has alternatives, or because it's in a financial state to have a little bit of headroom to help out, or because its economy is rich enough to have a bit of fat in it to withstand a short period of this. And it found that there are some countries which surprisingly are exposed very little and quite resilient, and those include Turkey, India, and then there are countries which are not very exposed, but they have very low resilience, like Bangladesh and Vietnam, Kenya, Sri Lanka. And then on the other side of the ledger, you have countries which have very high exposure, but high resilience, like Thailand, for instance. And then you have the worst affected, really, are countries which have very low resilience and very high exposure. And top of that list are Jordan and Pakistan. So they will experience this energy crisis in the worst way imaginable. Their populations really will suffer, and this will cause a major, major economic challenge for them.
Thank you for that. Finally, let's look at the big picture question. This is not the first time a distant conflict has exposed UK vulnerability to external shock, particularly energy. What can, should, would a government of any shade realistically do to build more resilience for our energy security now? Or are we just doomed to be at the mercy of whatever is happening in the more volatile parts of the world?
Well, we've been through this so many times, haven't we? Because there's a lot that can be done, but none of it's sexy and none of it lands before the next round of headlines. And lots of it is controversial in certain sections of society anyway. You reduce exposure by cutting demand for imported fossil fuels, and you expand domestic low carbon power. You do things like improve insulation. You do what the government has done and say every new house has to have a solar panel or two on the roof as well. You improve storage, you work on the grid's capacity, you just diversify supply, and you start to treat resilience as being a core part of our national infrastructure rather than some sort of political speech. Now, look, there's some bypass pipeline capacity in the Gulf, but there's nowhere near enough to make Hormuz irrelevant even for us. So for Britain, the long game's really obvious. Less gas dependence, better homes, more reliable domestic generation. The depressing bit is that governments of all colours only seem to discover this after each shock. It's kind of like a man who just keeps forgetting that the oven is hot. Oh, there we are again, every single time.
I'm a bit less glum than Kenny on this because
You've got your oven gloves on.
Simply speaking, all of those things have a cost attached to them. And so you remember when we were discussing just-in-time supply chains and how badly they were affected by COVID? It was a big topic of conversation. Companies had switched to just-in-time supply chains because they had a cost sense to them, right? Because you didn't have to pay for loads of storage, because you didn't have to hold loads of stock. All those things cost money. The question is what the balance of the risk is with the cost you're spending to mitigate it. So absolutely, we should be rebuilding some of our storage capacity. Much of it was left to wither away, especially during the austerity years, and will now cost a lot more money to reopen. But that infrastructure does cost money to maintain and keep filled. And there's a natural wastage, of course, every time you store something like oil or gas or whatever. So there is a cost to it. If you go overboard and fill the country with storage, then you end up with much higher energy prices during the much longer periods where there isn't an external shock. What I'm saying is there is a balance to be struck. We should be more resilient than we currently are. there is a limit to what you can do to completely insulate a country from external shocks before that actually starts to make you a very expensive country because you are structured to withstand any external shocks. The other problem is that there's quite a lot of opportunistic and quite cynical positioning going on. Let's have a little listen to Kemi Badenoch from this week's PMQs.
Will the Prime Minister approve the licences for Rosebank and Jackdaw gas fields in the North Sea?
Yeah.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, oil and gas is coming out of the North Sea 24/7. It will be part of the energy mix for many years to come. We fully support all existing oil and gas fields throughout their lifespan, and in November we made changes to extend to allow neighbouring fields to be exploited. But we need to take control of our energy prices. The only way to do that is through renewables. The party opposite used to make that argument. One of their senior figures in 22 said this: it's investment in nuclear and renewables that will reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and keep our consumer costs down. Who was that senior figure? The leader of the opposition.
Every expert analysis we look at shows that issuing more drilling permits will do nothing to lower energy costs right now. It will do nothing to deal with this situation. There's a huge time lag. Pricing on oil is global. It's just being used to push the interests of people who like to drill for more fossil fuel anyway. And it's actually pretty disgraceful to be doing that during a genuine crisis and should be called out.
Alex, give us a call to action. How can we play a tiny part in helping ourselves when it comes to reduction of how much energy we're using?
Not just to help ourselves, to help everyone, because if we all make an effort to reduce our energy consumption right now, it actually makes a difference to how much demand there is over the supply there is in the whole global market. So if we all do a little bit, we can actually make a meaningful difference. And I've been looking at various ways to reduce energy consumption. Some of them are new. So reduce your washing temperature a little bit from 40 to 30, or reduce the temperature of your thermostat. The weather is getting nicer now. Dry your clothes on the line. If you have any outside space, tumble dryers are an absolute nightmare in terms of energy consumption. But there's also things I didn't know about, like chargers still absorb energy even when the thing is not plugged into them. I didn't know that. So once your phone is done, unplug the charger. Once your laptop is on 100%, unplug the charger. It's actually very bad for lithium batteries to have them constantly on mains electricity anyway. It's much better for the battery to charge it up and then let it run down and then charge it up again. Bleed your radiators, descale your kettle. All these things make stuff more efficient. Clean the vents behind your electrical appliances. Believe it or not, makes a massive difference in consumption, in how hard they have to try to keep cool. So anything that's got a vent behind it, you just give that a hoover and you've just saved yourself like 30 quid.
Does that apply to cats?
Cats are very well known as energy emitters rather than energy absorbers. You can put them next to the radiator for 5 minutes and they will emit heat for at least an hour.
Quiet, Riot.
Reggie, I just sold my car online.
Let's go, Grandpa. Wait, you did?
Yep, on Carvana. Just put in the license plate, answered a few questions, got an offer in minutes. Easier than setting up that new digital picture frame.
You don't say.
Yeah, they're even picking it up tomorrow. Talk about fast.
Wow, way to go. So, about that picture frame.
Forget about it. Until Carvana makes one, I'm not interested.
Car selling made easy. On
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.
Quiet, Riot.
Now it's time to clutch your pearls, raise your eyes to heaven and ask, won't somebody think of the snowflakes? It's time, of course, for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey. Wokey Dokey.
Alex, what's woke this week?
Okay, so this week I'm going to do something different. I'm not going to tell you what's woke. I'm going to tell you what woke is. So, woke is Christian heresy.
Okay.
Okay.
According to Nigel Biggar of The Spectator. And this is because woke is anti-West, West is Christian. So every time we go on about colonialism and feel bad about what we did, we're actually being anti-Christian. I cannot tell you how messed up this argument is. It argues that because empire was instrumental in abolishing slavery, countries which we had enslaved should be thinking as the whole thing is incredible. Christianity was instrumental in defeating the Nazis. Don't ask me to explain how. The point is that Christians have to accept that you are the righteous people in order to be a proper Christian, because then you're free to go out there and proselytize others. And if you
Crusaders
don't accept that,
assemble.
Exactly. And if you don't accept that, if you're woke about things like trans rights and race and colonialism, you're basically on the side of Satan. That's the argument. Enough holding on to a few bad things we may have done. And what struck me particularly was that there was a very interesting position to take for a religion which is based all around the fact that we are all tainted by that original sin of the very first couple, which means we have to atone constantly and for eternity. So this week, woke is heresy.
Thank you, Alex. Listeners, keep them coming. We love to hear it. Send them through to quietriotpod@gmail.com.
Quiet Riot. Now, less than 2% of Britons belong to a political party. That's it. A tiny, self-selecting sliver of the population, and yet this small group holds enormous power. They choose who stands for parliament, they pick party leaders, and in a hung parliament, they could even have a say in who actually governs the country. And they did in the case of Liz Truss, you may remember. So who on earth are these people? A research project out of Queen Mary University of London and the University of Sussex has been surveying the members of Britain's 5 main political parties since just after the 2015 general election, and the latest findings, collated just after the 2024 vote, were published last week and make for fascinating reading. The picture they paint is of a membership that is older, whiter, more male, and more middle class than the country they purport to represent, and which is hardening into 2 increasingly distinct and hostile to each other blocs. What's also striking is just how little many of these members actually do. Joining a party, it turns out, does not necessarily mean delivering a single leaflet or knocking on a single door. At the last election, huge numbers of members did absolutely nothing to help their party at all. The activists of legend are very much the exception rather than the rule. But here's the thing, even a largely passive membership still shapes our politics in ways most of us never see. With Britain's party system fragmenting fast and the possibility of another hung parliament looming, understanding who these people are and what they believe matters more than ever. Do you think most people have any idea that such a small group has so much power, I guess?
Not remotely. I mean, not even vaguely. I mean, most people don't engage with politics outside of the electoral cycle's highlights anyway, do they? So I can't see any way that the general public are going to realise how tiny this group is. I mean, most voters assume that, quotes, the public, close quotes, chooses politicians. You know, it's not. It's a politically obsessed minority with a membership card and a whole heap of opinions. You know, and that's not a conspiracy theory. That's just how the system has evolved. As if your take on it is any different, Naomi?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect very few people think about it. You know, they don't think about it. They're not members themselves, and they probably don't know many people who are members of a political party. And like when I think about the Lib Dems back in 2010, there was an emergency conference to which all members were eligible to attend, and they had to hire the NEC in Birmingham to accommodate them so that there could be one member, one vote on whether or not to join coalition with the Tories. Now, I think if that vote was to happen again next time round, it would be nowhere near the landslide vote that Nick Clegg got from his party back then. So there
would be a landslide no, I would suggest.
Well, if it was with the Tories, but even with Labour or, you know, some other formation, I don't think it would be quite as clear cut as last time round, and it might be no, we remember that, and this time we'll only go for confidence and supply or whatever rather than full coalition. And it had become a referendum on Nick Clegg within the party and his leadership, which is how it was posited rather than should we really be backing George Osborne's austerity plan. I think that there is so much hard power that, as you quite rightly mention, Alex, otherwise lay members can have at very, very critical moments for the whole country. So, no, I think most people aren't aware, and it's a really interesting piece of work.
Yeah. If we dive into the actual data, Naomi, what's the demographic picture the study paints to start with, I guess?
I'll kind of cut it in two directions. I'll do gender and then I'll do age. So on gender, the pattern is stark. Across all 5 parties that the study looks at, men outnumber women. But where it gets interesting is when you look at where on the spectrum those parties sit. So the further right you go, the more male the membership gets. So Reform and Tories both very heavily male dominated. You've kind of got Labour being a bit better, but not balanced. And then you've got the Greens, who at the time of the work being done, which predates Zach Polanski by a year, are the only party that can genuinely claim to have achieved something like gender parity in their membership. So there's a very clear correlation between political outlook and who walks through the door. And I was sort of thinking about the Greens being different on gender. I suppose it reflects a broader pattern in how men and women relate differently to causes. You've got a Green Party that has always positioned itself around values like community and environmental responsibility. And we know from other research that those are causes that resonate much more strongly with women than men. And it's also a party that has made a really conscious effort to be welcoming and inclusive in ways that other party structures haven't always managed. They don't have a whipping system for their MPs. They like having co-leaders. They have a very consensual approach to agreeing outcomes at meetings. So I think they give off a less macho vibe. And Labour has never had a woman leader, other than interim with Harriet Harman. The Lib Dems have had one, but she was not popular at all. And the Tories have had quite a few women leaders, but they lean into the macho management style, probably because they have to in order to get the job in the first place. While the Greens have had Caroline Lucas, they've had Sian Berry, they've had Carla Denyer, who led in a much less aggressive way.
The outlier to this largely, as I expected, model are the Lib Dems. They are the most male of all the parties. And that did really shock me. They are more male-dominated than Reform. What's that about?
What does the Lib Dems currently offer women? You know, they don't talk about the kind of liberal issues that women, and particularly young women, really care about. They don't lean into things like abortion access and reproductive health. They have quite a lot about care and caring responsibilities, which we know fall much more to women than men in our economy. But beyond that, they talk about a lot of things that I think maybe men care more about.
Anyway, so age.
So the Greens and Labour appear to have the youngest profiles, relatively speaking. Labour obviously had a significant surge in younger people during the Corbyn years. And while that enthusiasm has obviously cooled considerably by the time of the 2024 election when this work was done, some of that younger membership stuck around. And the Greens were already showing a younger and more diverse profile in the 2024 data. And one imagines that Zach Polanski has since brought a new wave of energy and recruitment to the party amongst young people. So I think it's reasonable to assume their numbers on both age and gender have only improved since this work was done. But even so, we are talking about modest improvements on a dismal baseline. No party has cracked the problem of turning the genuine political energy that does exist among young people into party membership. And across all 5 parties, young people are pretty absent. Like 18 to 24-year-olds are about 10% of the adult population in the UK, but none of the parties does more than about 4% of their membership in that age group. So they're drawing their active base from an overwhelmingly older pool of people. And that raises questions about your long-term sustainability, about whether the views being represented inside those parties reflect where younger generations are. And so why aren't people joining when they're at uni, going to their freshers' fair, seeing the local Labour student group or young Tories or whatever and signing up? Look, partly it's structural, like you've got to join, you've got to pay a subscription, although most parties offer a very reduced rate for under 30s or under 25s. But you've got to attend meetings. It kind of feels like a very 20th century way of doing politics to a generation so used to organizing differently and faster and more horizontally and online. But also it has got to be about trust. Like, young people are not apolitical. They care deeply about issues like housing, climate, their economic prospects. But I think they just look at the party system and don't see the point. And that's the problem parties, I think, should be taking much more seriously rather than just waiting for people to age into membership.
That's interesting.
Also, we know that millennials are the first generation to not get more right-wing with age. The FT did really good work on that. And obviously they're the high productive part of our economy at the moment. They're the people that have got the experience, they're earning the most and are not seeing the receipts of capitalism. They have no stake in capitalism because they cannot access capital. They cannot save enough to buy homes. They are facing lower social mobility outcomes than the generations before them. They're worrying about having children. They're worrying about whether or not they'll be able to retire before they're 75. And again, I think that will make you just less inclined to participate in a structure that has failed you.
Can I ask something specific to Labour? How accurate are those figures given affiliate membership or associate membership? Like, I get the perks of being a member of the Labour Party by being a member of the Fabian Society. So I get to vote at leadership elections, etc. I have campaigned for my local MP in the past, despite not being a signed up member of Labour itself. And I know that many people get Labour membership via being members of the union. Is Labour more representative, actually, if you take that into account? And should that be a model that other parties look at? Should parties be looking at affiliate and associate membership through organizations that include a lot of people to kind of allow more of an influence of actual voters into the decisions they make? Or do they not want that, actually?
Well, I think in the Labour Party, what you've got is an institution set up on economic lines. If you are a worker, come and join us. And that hasn't really survived the 21st century. It's very 20th century coded. And so I don't know that other parties would sort of have that arena ready-made to go and offer themselves. You're right. I think that the figures probably do look bigger and better for Labour if you include all of those kind of proxy memberships, if you like. I mean, the Green Party has a friends scheme where you can pay to, I think, like 12 quid a year or something to be a friend, but you don't get the perks of being a member in terms of democratic voting rights and things like that. But then when you look at the Gorton and Denton by-election and the thousands and thousands of activists that turned up to campaign for Hannah Spencer, a lot of them won't have been members.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Parties also benefit from people turning out and helping them at a crunch moment without wanting to have a say in how policy is shaped and go to their conferences and vote in leadership elections and so on. So it doesn't tell the whole story of support in the country for parties, but I think it is nonetheless a very interesting look at just how pale, male and stale all of the political parties are, frankly.
The other thing is that party members are surprisingly lazy, as I mentioned at the outset. Like, they do very little actual work to help the party. Is there an element that, I guess, with the online environment and the advent of clicktivism and the ease of paying your membership dues online, etc., this has become sort of a crowdfunding exercise rather than an actual active joining of an organization? People basically give their fiver and they think, I've done my bit.
And also, parties generally hate their members. They're a pain. If it wasn't for this pesky democracy, I'd be this wonderful benevolent dictator telling everyone what our policies were and what we're going to do in government. And they see their member events, like party conferences, as fundraisers. I mean, the Tories are unashamed about it. No policy is made by the members at all, but they'll have their big
Reform
tambourine,
charges tickets.
Yeah, and charge tickets for it. And you'll all queue up around the block to see Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson or whomever it is. With the Lib Dems and Greens, and to a much lesser extent Labour, you do have democratic policy making, but as sure as eggs is eggs, they're doing those events to bring the cash in twice a year or once a year, however often each of those parties chooses to have a national assembly. So you're dead right about that. But then when you're looking at the demographics and you're looking at how old a lot of these people are, I'm afraid that their knees are not up to scaling a tower block to deliver 500 leaflets on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. And then the young people don't have the time because they're out working 2 or 3 jobs and childcare and all the rest of it. So there's also that to take into account too.
And one other thing to take into account is that politics isn't like a gym membership. It's an identity badge for people, isn't it? There's been plenty of research that shows many people sign up to a party to not just express their values, but to feel part of a tribe or to influence leadership votes, not to knock on doors in the rain. But I think there's a caveat to that. And Naomi, you mentioned Gorton and Denton, where the Greens came out in force. That was an identity badge. Knocking on doors in the rain was actually a way of identifying with a movement that people wanted to be identified with, that sort of was almost running in parallel to party membership.
You're reaching for the phrase virtue signalling.
Take me out and shoot me.
Quiet, Riot. Quiet, Riot.
If we look at the data on education and class, that's quite interesting too. And I found it a little bit depressing, to be honest. There was a sense actually that reform seemed to be the closest to the actual mix in the country in terms of how many working class people they attract and how many people who don't have a university education, they're not graduates, they attract. Is that a problem to do with the language on politics? Are we pitching our politics at a level where they become exclusive of a massive, massive group of voters?
The disengagement with politics, not just in this country, but globally on many levels, has been an issue for as long as I can remember. Certainly something very problematic about how the political world chooses to engage with the broader public, or let me put it another way, chooses not to engage with the broader public until such time as that becomes a prerequisite of their survival or success. Some of this is deliberate. I think that's the point I'm making.
There is also the causation and correlation issue in the question. Older people are less likely to have been to university than younger people. Now, that may change for the generations coming through because of how extortionately expensive university tuition has become. We know all of that. That's for another day. But when we looked at the Leave Remain vote in a lot of detail, which political scientists pored over, and which, if you ever catch John Curtis talking about it, he will remind everybody, it was not that the educated turned out for Remain and the less educated for Leave. It was that older people, much less likely to have been to university, turned out, and younger people were much more likely to want to stay in with all the opportunities that it would then have for them and their career and their lives, and cultural affiliation being different, etc. And then they were more likely to have degrees. So he will tell you it was age was the big correlator and not
That's
education.
interesting.
But you're right. And I think what depresses me sometimes when talking to MPs is how interested in focus groups they are. Why does that depress me? Because a constituency MP should be doing a focus group every week by knocking on doors in real time, out in the community, holding their surgeries, hearing firsthand what is upsetting people, what's worrying them, what is motivating them, etc. And I think the nature of how an MP's job now is, the huge amount of parliamentary work to do, often having to take on extra things, being a PPS or sitting on an APPG or a select committee or whatever, and then having to go to other parts of the country to help a colleague out who's got an election on in their patch, etc., means that they're just not able to do as much in constituency work. So they are less able to understand and empathise with the issues that the vast majority of people are facing. And then that does bleed into how policy gets formed. And then that does make politics the pursuit of the privileged, educated elite.
I think that's a lesson that applies to life more broadly as well, Naomi. And that reliance on focus groups causes me concern because I've been in focus groups, I've sat in focus groups, I know how they work. Back in my days in newspapers, there was a lot of work done with focus groups to ascertain what they liked and what they wanted more of and less of. And in the focus groups, time and time again, people said, look, we want more politics and we want longer reads. Now, the focus group said that. When I went on the tube in the morning and looked over people's shoulders to see what they were actually reading, it was show business every time, every single time. So stick them in a focus group and they will tell you one thing. Sneak a look around the corner to see what they're actually doing, and they've all got the same habits. The point is that you must plug in to your audience on their level, and that's what focus groups often fail to do.
We should be working together. Like, the Greens are doing well right now. I'm not here to bash the Greens. At the same time, I think there is genuine ideological differences. The Green Party is not a socialist party. I want to join and be part of a grassroots socialist party that doesn't have councillors who are implementing austerity policies at the local level. The Green Party doing well is a positive thing for progressive politics, but it does not replace the Socialist Party.
Kenny, you've been looking at the policy differences between the two blocs and how those have been developing and how hostile they are to each other. So what stood out in that bit for you?
The two blocs, the sort of right bloc versus the progressive bloc, are, I think it's fair to say, more solid than they used to be, but they're certainly not indestructible. They're solid at the top level and perhaps surprisingly brittle underneath. At a glance, the two block structure is real. The research shows clear clustering that doesn't surprise us. Conservative and Reform members align on things like immigration, surprise, surprise, on national identity, and on scepticism about institutions, while Labour, Lib Dem, Green members, they tend to cluster around issues like redistribution of wealth, around climate, around social liberalism. So, ideologically, the camps are pretty coherent. It's not the 1990s much anymore. But once you scratch the surface, it becomes a little bit less two tribes and a little bit more two pretty uneasy coalitions. So on the right, that conservative Reform overlap is very, very real, but it's also unstable. Reform members are typically more anti-establishment and less attached to traditional conservative economic orthodoxy. While Tory members, well, they still care about governing credibility and about the party brand, as damaged though it is. That creates tension. One side wants disruption. The other wants power without chaos. And that's not a natural marriage. That's a tactical alliance waiting for a row to blow up. On the progressive side, I think it's even messier. Labour, Lib Dems, Green members, they broadly agree on social issues, but they start to diverge quite sharply on how radical to be on issues such as the economy, on issues such as climate timelines, and electoral reform, one of our favourite bugbears. The Greens, in particular, and not surprisingly, sit quite a bit further out on policy, and they attract a pretty distinct membership profile, especially on, not surprisingly again, on environmental urgency and internal democracy. So that bloc exists electorally, but ideologically it's kind of held together with polite disagreement and also a shared dislike of the other side.
And I wonder to what extent, almost 2 years from that election data, the level of hostility towards Labour from the left side will have increased. Because it's certainly, anecdotally, just from conversations with friends, it does seem to have gone up. And so I'm not sure there's even that uneasy coalition to be had on the left, and very much it's there for the taking on the right. As unstable and ready to blow up as you are right, it will be.
Now, we've just been covering the UKIP manifesto launch up the road.
They're heroes.
They are. And are you a traditional Conservative?
Yes, I've stood as a Tory candidate many times.
What, for local elections or Parliament?
Parliament.
Oh, really?
It seems to me...
You live around here?
Yeah, just down the road. Here, they've got a good chance of winning, but for odd, atavistic reasons, not for free trade, free market, libertarian reasons.
OK, so what's your name, sir?
My buttocks are smooth, my mind is clear. Vote UKIP.
Naomi, what's the call to action here?
Well, read the research. We'll leave a link in the show notes. And I mean, if you're feeling particularly deviant, I guess you could join a party. As I mentioned, you can join some of them as a friend, for a lesser amount and show your support that way. Or, as Alex mentioned, join a union. You'll still get a vote in leadership elections for Labour-affiliated unions. Or just contact the local party of choice and go and help them out. There's elections happening absolutely everywhere in the next month or so, and they'll be very pleased to see you and have you go out leafleting with them.
And a little call to action for us, I think. So I will undertake to have a little look to see if there's any data like this about Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland, because this research only looks at national parties. But it seems to me that the relevance of parties like Plaid Cymru and the SNP will be huge in the upcoming elections and then the general election that follows those, because they provide a very clear, different, progressive option in those areas. So I'll try to do a little bit of digging and see if we can do a segment on Sunday that does the equivalent for party membership, but looks at Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. And if the data is not there, the data is not there, but I'll have a go at finding it.
Quiet Riot.
Okay, we've walloped you with war, doom-scrolled the economy, and celebrated the slow collapse of political sanity. So it's only fair we try to balance the books. Here at Quiet Riot, we like to spread the joy, and we ask you to do the same. All of which means it's time to grin and share it.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. I want good news.
What have you got for us, Naomi?
Hedges. Have you ever looked out across the English countryside and thought, this needs more hedge? Then we've got a story for you. Volunteers and hedgerow experts in the south of England have spent 3 years building the Hampshire hedge. It's this continuous, unbroken line of hedgerow that is now going to connect the South Downs to the New Forest. 15 miles of hedge on purpose. And before you scoff, this is no joke in the wildlife world, because these green corridors are a natural highway for over 2,000 species over the course of a year. You've got things like hedgehogs, harvest mice, birds, obviously, insects that help to pollinate all of our fruit and veg, all threading their way through what is essentially a very long, very important bush. And in a part of England that is extremely densely populated, really, in the south of England, and that kind of habitat connectivity is increasingly hard to come by. So it was all led by the Hedgerow Heroes programme, with backing from conservation groups and the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And they completed it this year, and they had a big celebration that they brilliantly called Hedgefest, which sounds very fun. And I thought that the chair of the South Downs National Park Authority, Vanessa Rowland, summed it up really lovely. She said, we've always wanted to have a closer link with the New Forest, and now we can do it physically and environmentally for the wildlife. So there you go, 2 national parks, 1 mega hedge, and a genuine reason to feel good about the world. So grin and share it indeed.
They're like a transport network for small animals, are they? Oh, that's brilliant. That's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, Naomi. Listeners, as ever, we'll drop a link to all that madness and happiness in the show notes so that you too can not just grin, but also share it.
Quiet Riot.
And on that somewhat rural note, that's the end of this week's show. Because I've got some Dartmoor to hike, Alex has got some bulbs to plant, and Naomi, well, of course, Naomi's got an Urbane SW1 bubble event to get to. To everyone at home, thank you so much for lending us your ears once again, and we hope that you enjoyed the show.
If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a fresh review, and head over to ko-fi.com/quietrightpod and sign up for as little as $5 a month to get treats like invites to our live session, the next one of which is this Sunday, 29th of March at 5 p.m. British Summer Time. And you'll have a chance to ask us anything. Be there or be someone who forgot that the clocks change on Saturday night.
We will be back before then for Sunday school, but it'll be too late by then to sign up for that Ask Us Anything show. So get on to ko-fi.com/quietrightpod by close of play Friday, and you'll be sure to get an invite from Kenny right on time.
We love you lots. Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simone Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese.
Quiet Riot.
I've got a curved monitor. They're not that expensive. Yeah. It was like 110 quid.
Oh, you've got a little one. You got one of these little gamey ones.
Well,
Ours has
it's
got
not-
53 inches. It's a sort of
No,
thing.
I know.
that put me
It's
in
not
wall.
that. It's not that small. It's like 30 inches, I think. Mine.
All right, boys, enough of your inches.